everyone. My name is Felipe Petch. So I started this as the American Dream as my myth, the overarching myth throughout the process, and then was going to focus on originally the 1920s. And as I progressed through the presentation or through my PowerPoint, it kind of grew into what led into the Great Depression. So it goes from about 1849. The initial gold rush in California to the end of the Great Depression, which is 1939. So before we kick off, what I wanted to do was, what does the American Dream mean to you? So just take a minute or two and think about what you would define the American Dream as, because it significantly differs from what the early 1900s and early 20th century were thinking of the American Dream when they were pursuing their happiness and hope from Mexico into what is now Southern California, Arizona, and Utah. So real quick, we have beginning from the 1850s to the 2000s, you saw a large influx, especially in the early 1900s, of immigrants, whether they are from European descent or Japanese and Chinese descent, and the Mexican Americans. The reason you have such a large influx, again, started with the gold rush that they had. We now have the San Francisco 49ers, but they were bringing in essentially free or cheap labor to mine all of the gold that was being discovered. Of the influx from 12 to 15,000 or 12 to 15 million rather people that came in over that time period, 3 or 4% of them specifically were Mexicans. And the reason that they were Mexicans was because, one, that's our next door neighbor, right? They were already there during the Treaty of Hidalgo when all of that became U.S. and they were granted citizenship, so they were Americans, but their grandparents or their parents that were already living in Mexico, maybe even 100 miles away, had to come and visit, or saw that there were better opportunities in Southern California. And their reason for migration was what their American Dream was. So during the late 1800s and early 1900s, you had Mexican civil wars. You had different city-states that were battling against each other, and that ultimately led to the revolution, which was, I believe, in 1910. So they wanted economic stability away from what they were facing every day. So they came into California hoping that they'll find work, which again is still what is going on today. Their work was significantly different than what people are chasing today. They were, like I said, hoping to escape oppression, and that's from the dictatorship that Mexico was under before the revolution. Then they were essentially looking for hope, hope that was fueled by stories from, like I said, the gold rush during the 1800s. So they heard, there's all this wealth coming through, without the understanding that the wealth was owned by someone, or that all of that gold was through corporations or through millionaires or billionaires then, and were essentially exploiting the work of all of the immigrants that were coming in, whether it was Japanese immigrants during the internment camps or Mexican-American migrant workers. And like I said, they were coming in to essentially chase the American Dream. Now, part of what led them to that is the Roaring '20s, right? So they had stories of, or you look and see what The Great Gatsby depicts during that lifetime, or during that time period, where you have aristocrats throwing money away. You have lavish parties and socialites that were able to just do what they wanted when they wanted, because that was the type of America that they were looking for, right? They started from little ranches in Mexico and were chasing something larger, much larger than what they could have fathomed. So as they were coming in, they were immediately met with hurdles and obstacles. Part of them were, again, in the, right after the gold rush, miners, and specifically those that owned the mining process and equipment, were starting to force out a lot of the immigrants that were coming in because they were able to get cheaper labor from Chinese and Japanese Chinese and Japanese immigrants through agreements with the internment camps, as opposed to having to pay Mexicans that came over illegally or undocumented. From then, you had the Anglo-Saxon Americans that were in Southern California that looked down on immigrants.